And Anjalee, we were just talking about some comments that we got here in New York today about a potential timeline on the reopening, but we also got some troubling headlines, you could argue, over the weekend of some of these countries that we thought had pretty much, sort of cleared the hurdle, talking about new cases resurfacing, which I guess points to just how challenging managing this health crisis really is.
Absolutely, Kiko, and not just challenging, but kind of falls in line with what health experts have been saying. If you've been paying attention to the conversation, many health experts have said, as soon as you start reopening, expect to see more cases. And that's sort of the decision that state governors and local municipalities have to take, is whether or not they're prepared to handle what those cases will be like. I just spoke to a doctor earlier from Boston who was saying that, they just about reached the brink of capacity for their hospital, and thankfully it's coming down, but had it gotten any worse, they wouldn't have been able to. And so those are the kinds of stories you have to hear on what these decisions are, what these factors are that some of the governments have to weigh, including testing capacity. So as we're waiting to hear, from the White House what President Donald Trump's announcement is going to be about, from what we understand, it's going to be some portion of testing funding being distributed to these states who have complained that there isn't any really, federal level coordination on testing, as well as contact tracing. It remains a concern whether or not states can in fact ramp up the capacity for contact tracing, as we're waiting to see, how these many different strategies can be put into effect. We know that, some of the major tech companies even offer to sort of roll out apps or certain things that could be used, but those have been denied on privacy concerns. So going back to what we heard, in South Korea, in Germany, even in China, back in Wuhan, the epicenter of all of this, we've seen a resurgence of cases. And so that has been really troubling, especially because these are, as you mentioned, the countries that we were sort of looking to. The way that they had rolled out and reopened seemed pretty structured and seemed like they had the capacity that they needed to do so safely. And so the fact that they are still seeing cases is really a sign for us to be watching as we look to the states reopening. Akiko.
Yeah, Anjalee, I mean, to your point, a place like South Korea, I mean, they just started baseball, even without fans. So there was certainly a sense that things were starting to go back to normal. But to the point you just raised there about testing, I mean, in some ways, we look at other countries like South Korea, even China, they took much more draconian measures in terms of the stay-at-home restrictions. And then they have a lot more going in terms of the contact tracing, because they haven't had to deal with the kind of privacy issues that have popped up here. What are you hearing on the ground from some of these other states in terms of how the testing situation has improved? We, of course, are waiting this announcement coming from the White House, but the reality is the federal government alone simply isn't going to be able to help scale up the kind of testing these states need in order to resume life as we used to know it before COVID.
Absolutely. Well, you're hearing a lot of different things, and this goes back to the idea that it's really fragmented the way that the U.S. has responded to this, because you're hearing about businesses independently searching for testing capacity and finding it, as well as labor unions as well. I talked to a nursing union that said that they were able to fly in some supplies. And then you have the state and local governments, even local at the county level, are making those phone calls and trying to find supplies themselves. So it seems like, people have been able to figure out at least some way of getting that capacity that's necessary, but whether or not that can be sustained still remains to be seen. But it definitely seems like it's everyone for themselves at this point.